to our next speaker, Maria Pawelec. You should be co-host, so feel free to take a hold of the screen.
Thank you very much.
So my pleasure. So our next presenter is Maria Pawelec from the University of Tuebingen, Germany, and her paper is titled Ethical Deepfakes, the Value Held by Deepfake Developers and Creators and Their Governance Potential. So thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm also going to talk about a technology that will probably cause a lot of problems in the near future. So it's a very different AI technology, but I guess it fits in a way. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it looks perfect.
Okay, wonderful, perfect, great. Okay, so I am going to talk about a very specific aspect of deepfakes, which is my current work on the values held by deepfake developers and service providers and their governance potential. And this is also still a work in progress. So I also really look forward to your feedback and your questions on this. And just to begin with, a quick definition of deepfakes. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the technology. I know there was somebody talking about this already at the in-person conference. But just to reiterate, so my definition of deepfakes is that they are synthetic or manipulated audiovisual media, so pictures, videos, and audio tracks of human faces, bodies, or voices that exhibit a certain degree of photorealism and are often created using AI. And this definition is technically quite broad, so it also includes deepfakes that are created using text-to-image, text-to-speech, and text-to-video generators, if the results are quite realistic, and they are getting more and more so. So this technology has become very convincing and also increasingly accessible in recent years. You can now synthesize extremely convincing portraits of fake people with just one click. You can use the new text-to-image generators to create convincing images of identifiable people in fictitious settings. So there are these infamous pictures of Trump's alleged arrest this March, for example. And synthetic voices are also sounding more and more human, even based on only a few minutes of input data. And deepfake video quality is moving towards high-definition videos rendered in real time. So this also means that deepfakes are proliferating in all areas of our digital life, I argue, including deepfakes for political manipulation and disinformation, the big topic of non-consensual deepfake pornography, and deepfakes' growing use for cybercrime. But at the same time, deepfakes are also increasingly used for benign purposes, such as entertainment, arts, satire, and parody, and of course for commercial uses, in particular in the film, entertainment, and advertising industries. So deepfakes matter, and there are increasing moves around the globe to regulate them. And there's also a broader governance debate going on here about platform self-regulation, about increasing citizens' media competence and technical solutions to improve deepfake detection and media authentication. And I also agree that we need a combination of measures here, but I argue that this deepfake governance debate and also the debate on deepfakes' impact often overlooks the actual sources of deepfakes, so the deepfake developers and those that provide deepfake creation as a service to a broader, often paying public. And overlooking these actors can have very real consequences, as developers and providers can take certain steps to influence access to their technologies and their use. And drawing on AI ethics and technology ethics, I also argue that technologies aren't neutral tools, but they have certain values inscribed in them, which means that deepfake developers and service providers' values also impact the kind of deepfakes that are created and spread, and so deepfakes' overall impact. So my research attempts to answer the following questions: which values guide deepfake development and service provision across different sectors? What is the developers' view of their work and the potential impact of their technologies? How do ethical considerations compare to other motivating factors? But also, how do developers view their own and other actors' responsibility for deepfake governance? And to what degree can and do they influence the creation and use of deepfakes? And I'm going to focus here on deepfake developers in universities and also at app companies and specialized startups that are offering deepfake creation as a service. But I'm happy to tell you more about the broader deepfake developer landscape in the discussion if you're interested in that. To answer my research questions, I use qualitative research methods, including a document analysis of ethical manifestos, community guidelines, and companies' terms and conditions, as well as of media statements of company representatives of popular deepfake apps and of prominent synthetic media startups. I also analyzed technical papers on deepfakes. I'll come to that in a second. And I'm also conducting in-depth, semi-structured qualitative interviews with deepfake developers, so with machine learning and software engineers that work for apps and startups. And so far, I've interviewed 6 developers from Germany, India, Israel, and the US. And additionally, I have also interviewed 2 company representatives that work on policy advice and ethical AI in the Ukraine and in Israel. So I'll jump right to some preliminary results of my research now. And first, I'm going to focus on my review of technical academic contributions on deepfake development. So articles by scholars who are working to improve deepfake technologies. And I reviewed 17 recent contributions, which I chose based on current literature reviews. And I analyzed whether and how these papers mention and evaluate the deepfakes, so the technology that they are developing, the impact and the ethical implications. And it's quite striking that 6 of these 17 contributions included no non-technical references at all, so not even concerning potential positive uses of the technologies they are developing. The other 11 contributions at least included some references to those positive uses. Only 2 contributions even mentioned that there could be an abuse of the technology, and one of these simply noted the existence of, I quote, concerns about the potential for misuse of lip syncing. And there's only one notable exception, which is a preprint about an open source deepfake development project, Deepfake Lab. And this preprint goes into some detail about the potentials for abuse of deepfakes. It also highlights the need for better deepfake detection and increased citizen media competence. And it actually presents this open source deepfake development project as a way to enhance deepfake detection and public awareness. But what's noteworthy for me here is that this project, Deepfake Lab, has in fact been heavily criticized for enabling and even encouraging the creation of non-consensual deepfake pornography and other malicious uses of deepfakes. And the paper doesn't problematize this in any way, nor does it mention how Deepfake Lab is continuously enhancing deepfakes quality so that they can actually no longer be uncovered by regular citizens. And besides papers discussing this impact of deepfakes, one article I reviewed also mentions the author's motivation to enhance accessibility to deepfake technology. So we could call this kind of a democratization idea of the technology. And one article highlights the need for its technology to work for a wide range of lip shapes, but it doesn't relate this in any way to ethical issues of discrimination or inclusion. So overall, the academic contributions I reviewed, they largely omit any ethical or societal discussion, which is quite striking, I think, given these technologies' enormous impact. And there's only one exception, and I view this exception very critically. This brief analysis has quite some limitations, of course, which I'm happy to discuss with you later. But what I do think it shows is that discussing ethical and societal issues is just not part of the involved academic cultures, in particular in computer sciences. So it's obviously not a popular, let alone a required topic for respective publications. And to date, I've actually only interviewed one developer working in academia, and he confirmed that while the funding agency required his research project to work on ELSA topics, it didn't require him to publish on these topics. And he didn't think that they expected this of his technically oriented project. This interview also provided some first insights into technical scholars' views on deepfake development. So the interviewed developer exhibited some awareness and also a big worry about the implications of deepfakes. He worried about deepfakes eroding social consensus on the truth and leading to polarization. But he didn't mention deepfakes' use for non-consensual pornography, and he only talked about fraud and crime when I prompted him. Interestingly, he named a non-mandatory university course on technical philosophy that he took as his turnaround experience, which made him think about ethics. And he repeatedly stated that he wanted to make the world better using his programming skills. but he also admitted that he would probably not be working on ELSA questions currently if his funding agency hadn't required him to do so. And he mentioned a general lack of knowledgeable people in technology ethics that could help him with these ELSA assessments. And overall, he was very uncertain about how to deal with issues of responsibility and ethics. He mentioned a lack of respective regulatory guidelines. He was unsure whether or not he should make his code open source, but had a tendency not to do so to avoid abuse. And so we can see a lot of uncertainty there on his part. And it's definitely one of my ideas to interview more academics in the future to deepen this. Now let's come to the interviews with developers at a deepfake app company and 2 startups that I recently led, so to the commercial side of deepfake development. And I'd like to start with 2 quotes. The first is that the technology is getting to the point where anything you can imagine, any piece of media, you'll be able to create it simply by describing it. And the second quote describes the deepfake startup market. It's a competitive market and you have to do it quickly. They are releasing something, then you have to release that as well. So all interviewees actually mentioned that the quality of deepfakes is increasing rapidly and that the deepfake market is growing and there is a rise in competition, which could cut short ethical considerations. So how aware are these developers themselves of the potential abuses of their technology and deepfakes in general? So all interviewees talked about deepfakes' potential for political manipulation. They highlighted the erosion of trust and truth, and the app developer detailed how this would make it hard to arrive at collective decisions. It would create chaos and polarization and threaten democracy. And other issues that were brought up were the potential for global turmoil and religious polarization. And developers working at Deep Media, which is a US-based startup, also worried a lot about the use of deepfakes for fraud and scam. And interestingly, the interviewers also mentioned several issues that are quite rarely discussed in the deepfake literature, namely problems caused by synthetic media for artists, by copying their works, voices, or likenesses, and worries about deepfakes making social media even more engaging, leading to excessive social media use and data sharing. And the app developer highlighted that the creation of not safe for work content was the biggest type of misuse of the app that he was developing, and that child pornography was the worst use he was seeing. But he didn't detail this at all from a victim's perspective. So in fact, none of the developers mentioned the huge issue of non-consensual pornography in connection with deepfakes, and not even the app developer went into detail regarding the lack of consensus, the gendered nature of the threat, and the impact on victims. In the interviews, I also tried to find out more about what motivates developers and which non-technical considerations guide their everyday work. And the Deep Media developers stated here that it was important to them to do no harm, so a classic concept of technology ethics. They also highlighted diversity and inclusivity concerning both avoiding training data bias, but also the company itself, where they believed that employees' diverse viewpoints helped make the company more ethical. But they also admitted that they would like to have more women in their ranks, but they simply couldn't find anybody. In terms of non-commercial benefits of the technology they developed, the Deep Media developers highlighted that their product could bridge language gaps and allow diverse opinions to spread globally, while the app developer was excited about his technology evening the playing ground between artists and enhancing creativity. But the app developer, for example, also showed a very strong technical focus. So he mentioned that he liked to work on new technical developments to the point that he wasn't interested in improving content filters since other companies were already doing so, although this could really help mitigate deepfake abuses. Similarly, the startup developer was absolutely unsure what I actually meant when I asked about non-technical aspects guiding his work. And then he talked a lot about the quality of training data from a very technical perspective, and also about the opacity of algorithms, but only as a technical problem, since it made it hard for him to fix any bugs that would come up. Concerning responsibility for the impact of deepfakes, the app developer believed that individual developers have a moral responsibility. He also stated that he would like to work more on technical ideas to combat misinformation, but that his company wouldn't let him because it wasn't going to make them any money. Similarly, the startup developer said that he would like to improve content filters, which would be technically easy to do, but this conflicted with business interests and the tasks that his boss was assigning to him. And he also underlined that he wasn't involved in product development or content moderation. So here we see that developers' ethical considerations conflict with hierarchies, with the division of labor, and with commercial interests of the companies where they work, in some cases. Interestingly, the deep media developers very clearly saw the primary responsibility for mitigating deepfake abuses with the companies offering the technology, and here in particular with the CEOs and the board. But they unfortunately also believed that their competitors just didn't care about the products and how the products were being used. And in fact, both the app and the startup developer that I interviewed kind of underlined this by highlighting commercial and competitive pressures on their companies, a lack of resources to delve into ethical questions, and a lack of company guidelines on ethics. But companies are taking diverse measures to prevent the abuse of their technologies. So Deep Media is very dedicated to improving deepfake detection, and the Deep Media developers also highlighted the importance of informed consent of everybody depicted. Deep Media also fully automates the translation of input texts so that there's no room for manipulation, they say. It stores all deepfakes it has created on the blockchain, and it even uses an audio deepfake detector to scan input data for its lip sync and dubbing service. In terms of incorporating ethics into the company itself, the interviewees highlighted that the company has a very open discussion culture about ethics, that it includes all employees, that they regularly share information about technical trends, but also about ethical topics surrounding generative AI, and then discuss them in separate or regular calls, and that they have an internal ethics committee consisting of interested employees. And they also stated that they had, in fact, in the past, refrained from product development for ethical reasons. So, for example, they decided not to develop a face swap tech for ethical reasons. Concerning the other startups measures, the interviewee highlighted that only business partners could create avatars of celebrities who had actively consented to this. The company also conducts AI-based content checks, but with a success rate of only about 70%, and manual checks of randomly selected videos. They also block certain customers and they watermark their videos, but not on the metadata. And the Deepfake app company tracks all the content created using both AI and human moderation. But interestingly, they only focus on not safe for work content here. So not, for example, on content that's impersonating or violates copyrights. And the company is also currently quite aggressive in blocking content, but the developer reported that they were so aggressive and strict due to the App Store guidelines and the fear of being kicked off the App Store, whereas they have a Discord channel, which allows the creation of certain not safe for work content, and this is only moderated by a few human moderators. So companies have very different measures in place to stop abuse of their technology. We also see a varying degree of commitment to ethical reflection and implementation, for example, in terms of content filters. And this is also something that my document and statement analysis confirms for the most popular deepfake app companies, but unfortunately there wasn't any time to present that today. So overall, developers are aware of the abuse potential of their technologies, but they focus very much on political abuse, which is also at the center of the public and media debate on deepfakes. And quite strikingly, developers completely disregard the huge issue of non-consensual deepfake pornography and the technology's gendered impact. And concerning non-technical motivations and personal values, developers highlight factors like wanting to make the world a better place, enhance creativity, and build bridges between people. But sometimes individual developers are caught between their own ethical positions and business interests. And companies offering synthetic media are taking numerous measures to make sure that their tech isn't used for malicious purposes. But here again, there are great differences between companies and their degree of commitment to ethical reflection and also to implementation measures, such as content filters. So what does this mean for future governance? So for one thing, developers shared certain best practices, which I think could prove fruitful for other companies. And also in the interviews, they detailed their ideas on wider deepfake governance, and they made many very concrete suggestions here. many of which aren't really discussed in the literature so far. So, for example, using blockchain to store and create a public data set of all deepfakes created, or improving content filters in their tech. And I think that these ideas are valuable and they could be heard more in policymaking and also in academia. And in terms of concrete policy suggestions targeting developers and deepfake service providers, I think it's interesting that the app developer highlighted the importance of App Store guidelines. So that could be a very important governance mechanism in the future. And all my interviewees were actually computer scientists with formal university training. And they all welcomed the idea of changing the computer sciences curriculum to include mandatory courses on technology ethics, and also encouraging women to study computer sciences and become developers could strengthen awareness, for example, of the gendered threats of deepfakes. And lastly, I think changing the academic culture in computer sciences could be a powerful governance mechanism for deepfakes. The academic culture could include and also award a greater awareness and outspokenness about scholars' responsibility and the impact of their work. And measures could, for example, be a stronger focus on ethics in funding for technical research projects on deepfakes, but also asking for the inclusion of social and ethical discussions in publications on the topic, and rewarding interdisciplinary work in terms of academic careers, not just for computer scientists, but also for social scientists and ethicists working on technology ethics here. Thank you very much. And yeah, as I said, I'm very open for feedback, questions, anything that I didn't have time to talk about here.
Okay. Please, I saw a couple hands up, I think. So feel free to raise your hands or stick your question in the chat.
Sure, I have a quick question.
Oh, please go ahead.
Do you hear me? Yeah.
So, yes, you're right.
I'm just curious about one angle that you discussed tangentially. So the possibility that the same developers who are constructing the deepfakes might use the technology to unmask or discover where deepfakes are happening and segregate them, perhaps, or something like that. I mean, it just seems like thinking about the kind of people who are doing these things, sort of what challenges they enjoy and that sort of thing. It almost seems to me as though a better sort of organic option to manage some of these things is to ask the developers themselves to remedy their own problem in a certain sense. That is, for every ounce of energy they put into creating deepfake production technology, right, they put an equal ounce of energy into unmasking unwanted deepfakes that are out in the wild, so to speak. And did you pursue any of that sort of line, and how that kind of way of managing would be distinct from the sort of more conventional ways, which have to do with copyright violations or certain laws against pornography and so on?
Yeah, sure. So actually improving deepfake detection is one of the big governance mechanisms that is discussed when it comes to like countering deepfake threats. And it is actually interesting that it's usually not the same people that are working on deepfake detection and developing deepfake technologies. And there's always the problem that deepfake detection is always lagging behind. By definition, it will always lag behind a bit. So every time that a new deepfake detection capability is released, the deepfakes improve following that. And there's been lots of precedents for this. And deepfake generation has actually improved a lot because of the improvements in deepfake detection. So this is regarded as a cat and mouse game, where deepfake detection is always behind a bit. So that's also the reason why you can't fully rely on deepfake detection. There's also some other reasons, like false positives and false negatives, and if you if you filter all the content, for example, on social media platforms using deepfake detection, and then you have some false negatives, then these false negatives will have even more impact because people know that you have filtered everything using deepfake detectors, so it will seem even more reliable and trustworthy to them. So that's one part of that. What I think is really interesting is that Deep Media, this US-based startup where I interviewed 2 developers, is actually the only one of the startups that I have been talking to that worked both on deepfake generation and deepfake detection. That's really rare. So that would be kind of what you were suggesting. And they kind of see their deepfake generation area as subordinated to their deepfake detection. So every deepfake they generate, they feed into their detector. So it's kind of just helping them improve detection, and detection is their main aim.
All right.
But mostly these are companies that don't work on detection. That they're, for example, they are working on dubbing for Hollywood studios, or they are working on language translation and lip syncing and dubbing for content creators on social media, those kinds of applications. And often they are not, the same kind of developers that are working on detection. And detection, as I said, is a big governance mechanism that is discussed a lot. But those are usually not the same people as the people that are developing the actual deepfake technologies.
Gotcha. Right. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Monica, I see your hand up.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry. It's still, kind of very early here in Arizona. So it's only 6 o'clock in the morning. So anyhow, that's why you don't see me. So I have a question regarding this ethical problem with deepfake, and looking more from the bottom up. So what do you think of the crowdsourcing element in helping guide this issue with deepfakes? Point in case, like, 2 days ago, there was a deep fake of an explosion next to the Pentagon that caused the stock market to, crash momentarily, or will go down, momentarily. But then some people started looking at the image and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not a Pentagon building. So how could crowdsourcing be involved in this ethical question, and how we can empower people within this, conversation to also be aware of those deep fakes to help also guide the policies of companies and institutions?
So I think one big thing here is increasing media competence of regular users on social media, for example. That's definitely also a big governance mechanism that's being discussed. And for a long time, it was focusing on, enabling people to see a deepfake because there were some artifacts, for example, in it. But right now, the technology is really getting to the point where it's becoming impossible. So we can still see some artifacts, for example, in text-to-image generated images. So even the Trump arrest, sometimes he had 6 fingers, or he was wearing a police uniform or something like that. It was still kind of obvious if you look closely, even so that fooled a lot of people. But in the future, it's not going to be possible to see that anymore. So we have we're coming towards the point of perfect media manipulation, which of course doesn't mean that there is no way to discern that this is not real. I mean, if you're right next to the Pentagon and you have seen that it is still, not exploded, it's still fine, then of course you know that this is fake, even if the media that shows it looks perfect. So other I would say competences are going to get more important, like these classical ones, don't immediately share something that you see on social media. And if somebody is saying something or doing something that's completely out of character, then question it and don't just believe it, even if it's an audio track or a video that's proving that it's right. That's the kind of media competence aspect of it. And then there is also, as you said something about like crowdsourcing and like guiding policies of platforms and so. We are also seeing that. So there are increasing platform self-regulation efforts. For example, I think Twitter actually asked its users on its relatively new, not so new anymore, synthetic media policies that it included in its terms of use. So there was kind of some crowdsourcing element to their self-regulation development that was going on. So that is happening. And also, I mentioned earlier that I also did a document and statement analysis of different popular deepfake apps. So apps are really the tool with which deepfakes are becoming totally mainstream. You can install it on your cell phone, you can insert yourself into funny Hollywood movies, or you can animate a picture and give it a voice, things like that. And apps have very, very different approaches to also governing and to their own responsibility. And the most popular app, Reface, actually has community guidelines and is also calling upon its community to help it moderate negative uses of the technology. So there is like this crowdsourcing element that's going on. And what I also thought was really interesting was this kind of crowdsourcing element within the companies. So I saw this big difference in different deepfake development companies in terms of their ethical responsibility and their awareness of these issues. And Deep Media is definitely one of the companies that has a very advanced understanding of this and a very open discussion culture, as I said, on ethics in this small startup. So everybody's included, and they like described to me how they would put a new issue or a new idea on the table, and everybody would bring in their opinion on this. So there's also like crowdsourcing in this small in-company element going on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
I think there's one in the chat. If
great.
I see it right, with a different regulatory approaches by countries and
governments.
governments.
Yeah.
That's
I must have missed that
This
one.
is a big question, but there are different regulatory approaches, paradigms, ideologies that are being adopted, and deepfake regulation is just beginning, and we're seeing a lot of new regulation happening. There has been changes to the proposed AI Act, for example, to include synthetic media and to include these image generators together with large language models, so foundation models, for example. We see certain approaches here. What I think is most striking is that there has recently, this year, there was new laws passed in China on deep synthesis provision or providers. So these are like the most general regulations that have been passed so far on deepfakes worldwide. And very clearly we see here that there's a very strict regulation going on here. So all deepfakes have to be labeled. There is a need for consent for everybody depicted, and everybody who posts deepfakes has to be identifiable. So there are some elements of the internet, like anonymity, for example, that are being disregarded here. And this is definitely not an approach that democratic countries will be taking, I would say, because it also includes that all content has to be or has to align with the values of the Communist Party. So this regulation on deepfakes is also is like very political and going towards censorship. So there's also this kind of regulation happening, and in general, deepfake regulation is being combined with other elements of regulation. For example, in the UK, there's a new bill on online safety that's supposed to prohibit non-consensual deepfake pornography, but it's also been combined with rules that will kind of end encryption. So there's a lot of moves going on here to combine deepfake regulation with other regulatory goals, I would say.
Great, Michelle. Thank you for that question, and thank you for that excellent answer. We do, if there's any other questions, we can take some time for that. Now that I'm actually watching the chat. All right, well, thank you, Maria, for that excellent talk. Again, deepfakes are something that I keep seeing them come up on my feed, and it's pretty incredible, the different issues that come up. And I was just curious, do you see any ways in which we can start helping developers and startups think about these issues more deeply? I know I work with students, and oftentimes they're so enamored of the technology, they're just not thinking of the actual issues as they start up. Are there things we can do as educators or as consumers or as, experts in this field where we can start helping push um, people interested in using this technology to thinking more deeply about these ethical issues? It seems like they're kind of at the very surface and not thinking about how this is going to impact people at a deeper level.
So what I saw that in my interviews is that it's a very competitive market. But what people take from this is very different. So some companies and developers said like, yeah, we have to move quickly. We have no time to think about ethics. We just have to do it quickly because otherwise the others will do it before us and then we'll lose, competitive advantage. On the other hand, I saw companies or have been talking to company representatives that take a completely different approach and that, take an explicitly ethical approach, I would say, or are very vocal about their ethics and, red tape and the kind of deepfakes that they are and aren't going to develop, and that see this as a competitive advantage. And it depends on who's the customer, I would say. For apps, I'm not sure this is a competitive advantage because I don't think that, if you want to make a funny video of yourself in Titanic or something, you're not going to check out whether this deepfake app company is the most ethical on the market. But if you are a big Hollywood studio, for example, that has something like reputation to lose, then it does become a competitive advantage, I would say. And we have seen this, that companies that are particularly vocal about their ethics have been rewarded in terms of big contracts and things like that. But it doesn't always work like that, I would say. And what we as individual consumers can do, or as educators, what I really think would help would be the inclusion of technology ethics courses, for example, in specific fields like machine learning, computer ethics. And this is also something that, all the developers that I was talking to agreed with. So they said, okay, there's no point in including this in all engineering fields, but for specific fields that are developing AI that will have such a big impact on people's lives, this is really important. And what I thought was really interesting was that one of the developers actually said, yeah, this is so important because also because students, machine learning students are publishing open sourcing code that is revolutionary, that is very creative, that's going to change the market completely without spending one single thought on what this code is going to potentially do harm in society, just because they want to become, well-known, they want to land a good job on the market, and open sourcing fantastic code is the best way to do that. So it shows how important it would be to kind of reach developers early on.
Great, thank you. And for Jessica, I saw your thumbs up. I agree. I think we educators have a lot to do in this field, and thank you for providing us the background of what, where we're starting.